All right. I am recording. Good morning, good morning, good morning. It is Friday, March the 7th, and we are going to talk about some negotiations today. But before I do, the standard caveats apply. You guys probably know these from previous sessions. Anything we say is being recorded and will be coming out on a variety of public fora. So please be aware of that. Please be aware that anything you say will be seen by others. Also, please invite people to our groups and all of the associated groups that are online. Our community is stronger when we band together. The more we have, the better off we are. Let me turn my attention to what we're going to speak about today, because truthfully, this subject that I was a bit intimidated here. I'm just going to, where is it? There we go. That I was actually a bit intimidated to talk about, and for good reason. I'm aware of who the people are that are on our forum. Every person on our forum, whether you're a real estate agent or whether you're a lawyer, negotiates for a living. And accordingly, basically saying to, when I give these talks, generally, I'm able to fall back into the deep voice legal thing where, like, when someone asks me a question, I can just, spout off some law and we're good. Here, what I'm going to be saying to you has as much relevance, and you know as much as I do. This is really what I've decided to put together is the benefit of my experience of negotiating for a living. I do a lot of adversarial negotiation, quite a bit actually. And in that time, I've managed to gather some tips, some tidbits that hopefully you guys will find interesting and applicable to your workplace. But everything I say obviously can be refuted by your own experience, and you may very well have different contrary opinions. I don't suspect that this is going to take more than about 40 minutes today, and I would be interested in using the remainder of the hour hearing your experiences and perhaps your tips, because again, this is what we all do for a living. Now, I was originally calling this tips from 25 years of practice, but we seem to be in our own collective negotiations right now with a mad orange monkey south of us right now. And so decided to change this around and use the example of what we are dealing with as a country as we discuss this field of practice, negotiations. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Now, before any tips, I want to mention the one thing that is the law. So I'm just going to quickly talk. I mean, after all, this is a legal forum, so you'll permit me first to speak about the law. And I'm just going to, and I've mentioned this in the course, if any of you have taken my course, there is no obligation to negotiate in good faith, despite what every agent will tell you. Every agent will say, oh, yes, as a matter of good faith and negotiating good faith, and the Supreme Court has the obligation to negotiate in good faith. No, that's not what the Supreme Court has said. The Supreme Court has said that there is no legal obligation to negotiate in good faith. Good faith applies only to the fulfillment of contracts that have been formed. What that means in English is that you can lie, you can be deceptive, you can cheat, you can tell people you're going to do X and then you do Y. It's perfectly legal to do that. Perfectly legal to do that. And thus, it is in some people's arsenals to do that. And before I began with the tips that I have accumulated from my negotiation history, I figured I would mention that I really would strongly advise you to stay away from being untruthful in your negotiations. I'm not saying to you you have to be overtly truthful. In fact, that's actually one of the strategies that a lot of very young agents employ. Just overt truth that's like, I'm telling you everything. And that's not advisable in and of itself. I'm not saying to you you have to disclose everything. But being truthful and maintaining a professional reputation is incredibly important. You're going to find, and one of the things I'm going to talk about today are the types of people you encounter in negotiations. It is my experience that there is a type of person who lies as they breathe. And this isn't only in negotiations. Generally, if they lie as they breathe in negotiations, they do so in their personal life too. They do so to their spouse. They do so to their family. They have learned lying as a technique, where lying is not done nefariously. It's not done to hurt. It's just done as I'm fine with it. I'm just going to lie because it's easier and it's going to make everyone's life easier. And I care about the people in my life. So just lying about this is easy. It doesn't happen very often, but it happens. And there are those types of people who engage in that sort of life. Just as a matter of course, and before I get to things, when you identify someone as a liar, and occasionally you come across in negotiations people are liars, these are very infrequent. Don't call them out on it. Generally, people who are lying to the world are also lying to themselves. And calling them out on a lie is destructive to their entire edifice of who they are. And if you want to get anywhere in your negotiations, calling them out on a core element of concern to them, which they refuse to accept internally, is going to torpedo your relationship going forward. But my general point here is whereas there is no legal restriction on lying, there is no legal restriction on acting in bad faith, please act in good faith. You'll find that it gets you further in life. That, or you act in bad faith and you become the president of the United States. I mean, it's one of the two, but there's only one position for that every 4 years. So all things being equal, it's negotiating good faith. All right, so let's start with our tips. And the first thing I want to mention is that the benefit of experience, the difference between me and you, if you're a young lawyer starting out in year one, or someone who has 25 years of experience in negotiating real estate deals versus someone who's doing their first, is the ability to have run the road and run the race before. Any of you who are marathon runners, and I've only done a marathon once or twice, not that, yes, I did the marathon, I did the 10K component of the marathon, so I don't want to actually hold myself out as having done the full marathon, but those people who have done a 10K or trained for a half marathon or anything else are aware that it gets a bit easier every single time you do it, partially because you can identify where you are in the process. There's a point in running where you just feel absolutely exhausted, but if you push through, you actually get a new burst of energy. Those people who have pushed through before know that burst of energy is coming. Those people who haven't just feel they're going to continually get more and more tired, and it's deflating. That's the benefit of experience. The benefit of having run the race before matters. The difference between a seasoned negotiator and a non-seasoned negotiator is understanding what the road looks like. I'll give you an example. I learned only after about 10 years in my career that any single deal that net me more than $50,000 in a single transaction, every single one failed. That is to say, the parties walked away. I couldn't believe it when I finally put it together. But over 10 years of my career at the beginning, every single deal that net me $50,000 or more in a single transaction fell apart before it came together. And suddenly, I was no longer scared when the deal started falling apart. Suddenly, I began to identify that as part of the process. It's part of the process of negotiations, which meant that I wasn't panicking when someone said, well, we don't have a deal here, take care. And I would say, take care, knowing that I'd be speaking to them in a week's time. Because that became the identifiable pattern for me in the negotiations that I was engaging in. Now, someone who hadn't actually partaken in those negotiations and seen the deal fall apart over and over and over again would panic when it fell apart, might offer concessions when it fell apart, might go back to the client and prep them the wrong way, saying, well, the deal's done, what do you want from us? Meaning that the client is through a roller coaster. Whereas now when I have deals fall apart, certain deals, I often turn to the client and say, this is a negotiation strategy, hold tight. I'll be back to you in a week. And invariably, I usually come back to them in a week saying, okay, we're past the negotiation strategy. And in doing that, I have managed to mitigate the highs and the lows of the client who will be sitting there crying or not, or whatever it is, by saying to the client, listen, I can identify where we are, and I believe this is a negotiation technique. Hold on. When it becomes a negotiation technique, A, you look a lot smarter. B, you haven't had to deal with a crying client and all of the variations that go forward, and you've been in control of the process. But all of that can only be dictated by experience. And so, of course, for young lawyers and young realtors who don't have experience, merely saying this is not very useful because you don't have that roadmap. But what you can do is you can always identify at least If you can't identify where the curves in the path are and the little pieces of gravel, at least identify what the road is and where you want to end up. Because if you can identify where you want to end up and actually head out there, as long as the bumps in the road are netting you in a direction that's largely favorable to where you want to end up, you will be okay. And that's a really good way to start your negotiation histories. The second, probably the most important tip that I live by when I negotiate, is that you cannot control how your adversary behaves. Young negotiators continually try to convince, cajole, befriend, whatever it is, their adversary. But that is a fool's game. That's not to say you should try. That's not to say that you don't begin your negotiations with a, hey, how you doing? How was your vacation? Everything else, like your friendliness and trying to ultimately establish human connection. Because, of course, you want to be able to take negotiations forward and control where they go and everything else. All of that is true. But you don't control who your adversary is. And it took me a while to understand this. You know, in MBA, I took an MBA, and when I did, I took a course called negotiation, and they kept on blabbing about BATNA. BATNA. It's a business term that everyone learns. It means best alternative to a negotiated settlement. And best alternative to a negotiated settlement, to my mind, isn't presented to people who are learning to negotiate the right way. Because the way that it's presented to people is you should always have a best alternative to a negotiated settlement. But they don't really explain why you need that best alternative to a negotiated settlement. The reason you require a best alternative to a negotiated settlement is specifically because you need to be able at any time to take the person you're trying to lead, your adversary, and say, okay, you don't want to go there? I get it. No problem. And totally divorce yourself from their actions. You need to have the ability to have a path that you control through negotiations that is totally and utterly separate from who that person is. In the event of irrationality, in the event of adversarial aggression, you revert to your BATNA as a mechanism of control because your BATNA is something that you always can control. As an example, we cannot presently control what the orange monkey south of us is choosing to do to Canada. We cannot control the fact that tariffs are going to come. We cannot control that they will be delayed. And yes, we've tried to cajole and be nice to him and tell him that he's the smartest person on earth and God knows what, and that his makeup really looks very human, whatever it is that we are telling him. But we can't control him. And as a result, when the tariffs were actually put in place and we lost control, that is to say, there was nothing more we could do, we reverted to our BATNA. And in our BATNA, we maintained a sense of control. And I don't know if you guys saw it on social media. It's going to hurt. Like, oh my God, is it going to hurt? We're going to be much poorer as a result. But suddenly we were in control of our own destiny. And things started feeling like, okay, now we know how to tackle this. Yeah, we're going to put our tariffs on electricity. Yeah, we're going to put our 25% on. Yeah, we're going to diversify to Asia and to Europe and to everything else. And boy, is it going to be painful, but we are in control because we had a BATNA. So BATNA is not only about having a best alternative to a negotiated settlement, but understanding its use. Its use is to disempower an adversary, even an adversary that's more powerful in your negotiations. I'm going to pause for a second. Does anyone have any questions about tip 2 before I move on to tip 3? Nope. Okay. Well then, tip 3. Make your argument well. And remember the jam experiment. So I don't know how many of you know the jelly experiment, but there's actually a very famous jelly experiment. You know, there should be a book. I would love to write this book. It should be a book called Tips from a Grocery Aisle, because there are so many amazing tips from a grocery aisle. My grandfather used to run a grocery store in Montreal, and one of the first instructive lessons that he taught my father reminds me of this frequently, is a bag of potatoes. And not that this has anything to do with negotiations, but I just want to just point it out. A bag of potatoes has to do with pricing. He took a bag of potatoes, the same sack of potatoes. He put one in a bucket and then another in another bucket right adjacent to it. And he put a 69-cent and a 49-cent thing or price on each. And there were still people who bought 69 cents and there were still people who bought 49 cents because price differentiation works and because people are basing their purchase on perceived value. I bring this up only because there's many lessons you can learn from the grocery market. For the purposes of negotiation, the most valuable negotiation tip, actually probably the most valuable thing in life, was the jelly experiment, which is an actual experiment conducted by Stanford University. And what it was someone who went into whatever the Costco was of the day, the Costco aisle, and put out 17 jars of jam. And another equivalent person in the aisle next door put out 3 jars of jam. Which one do you think sold? Which one do you think sold more jam? I mean, you're going to know because it's somewhat counter. I mean, obviously, from the way I'm talking, you're going to know. But the person who sold more jam is the person who had 3 jellies. Now, that's a bit counterintuitive because we like to think that we like choice, but actually human beings are bedeviled by choice. That is to say, if you put a bunch of lions against a monkey in the jungle and you have 3 lions, the monkey will run. But when there's 17 lions that surround it, it just cowers and covers. We are good at making decisions with limited options, notwithstanding the fact that we believe we want a lot. You want proof of that? Costco has 1 option of every single thing. That's the reason everyone loves it. It's one of the major marketing tricks. You want to buy pickles, there's 1 brand of pickles there, or maybe 2. That in Kirkland, but nothing more. That's it. Limited stock items. Human beings like it despite the fact that they believe they want choice. And so, when I say make your argument well, which should be in red, by the way, and tell you to remember the jam experiment, what I'm telling you is to remember that people have trouble processing information in more than groups of 3 or 4. My telephone number is evidence of that. We've known this for 100 years. It's grouped, even though it's 9 digits. Is it 9 digits? No, 10 digits. Even though it's 10 digits, it's grouped into groups of 3 and 4 because that's the way human beings chunk information. So try to avoid making arguments with more than 3 points at a time. And if your opponents go ahead and do not know about the jelly experiment and do what some do in college debating classes or in your negotiations and do a 15-minute soliloquy about every single thing, they've noted down 15 points and gosh darn it, they're going to go through those 15 points. The way you need to handle that is by identifying the 3 you want to deal with and address only those. There is a line I use in negotiations when I'm dealing with a person who doesn't understand the jelly experiment, when I'm dealing with someone who just throws a million things. I'm listening to what they're saying and simply prioritizing a list of 3. And if they say something more important in their voluminous 15-minute talk, I simply cancel the one on number 3 and I add that one over to my list of 3. I keep a list of the 3 items I'm going to be addressing. And then I start, and I'm very short and sweet when someone speaks for a long time in response, because I want my matter remembered. And I say, I could refute every point you have, but your critical points are 1, 2, and 3, and I will address them in order. Point 1. Here's my response. Point 2, here's my response. Point 3, here's my response. And I bring you back to my stellar point, which is this. And in doing that, what you have is someone who's very disorganized as against yourself. Now, this only really works if someone is judging your arguments, right? You're not going to convince someone of this, but it also serves to create clarity in your own mind in the heat of battle, because that is what negotiations are for people who are not seasoned in them. They are incredibly stressed. They are incredibly difficult for a lot of people who don't engage in them daily. And as a result, keeping your headspace clear is something that is almost a Zen-like talent, given that you're feeling immense stress knowing that you're in a fight. Well, keeping clarity of headspace is done through the jelly experiment. It brings clarity to your thoughts and clarity to your process. I'm going to pause. Anyone have any questions about the jelly? Okay, let's move on to tip 4. Saying no. Saying no is a total skill in negotiations. No is not a word you should ever use without real thought as to how you're using it. And there's basically 2 ways of saying no. The first is the no you're very familiar with. And by the way, you can use this in discussions with your spouses as well, by the way. The hard no. And the hard no is issued bluntly, directly, without hesitation. A hard no is you saying, we ain't going there. And if you want to go there, we're at an impasse. We're taking this in a whole different way. We were negotiating before, but we ain't negotiating here. And if that no is to a critical condition point, something fundamental, then that just ends negotiations. Okay, we have to go to court or whatever it may be. If that no is to an ancillary point, then you better believe that that was something that your adversary, if they're halfway decent at negotiation, is going to hold over you as they themselves establish a no, which they're much more likely to do, a hard no, which they're much more likely to do you having given a hard no. Hard no's bring negotiations to a head, which, by the way, is not the worst thing in the world. Sometimes hard no's are needed. But more often than not, a hard no is used when a soft no can be used. A psychologist friend of mine, when he was in school, I don't even know if he remembers me telling it, but it was one of the most instructive things he's ever said. He told me that instead of ever saying no as a psychologist, but I use this all the time, you should always be saying something along the lines of, my initial inclination is to say no, but let me think this over and revert back to you. Now think about what that does. First, it shows respect to your opinion, even if you totally are going to disregard that opinion. It does not force a visceral response in your opponent. It also prepares them for where you're going to come back. So instead of the hard no, you're sitting there saying, look, I'm probably going to come back to you with a no, but I respect you enough to think this over. You've given me information. Let me do this. Now, this really sucks if I'm going to be negotiating against you in the future and I use this line and you now understand that actually that's just me giving you a hard no. But it's a different type of hard no. And it's critical to understand this skill set because you have to say no many times in detailed negotiations. And if your no is a hard no every time, you will find your job is incredibly more difficult than if you invoke your soft no's and your deferential dissuasion of points, which is a skill set that I suggest you learn very quickly. Honestly, I used to use this exact line because it wasn't second nature to me to give light no's. I used to use my initial inclination is to say no to this, but let me think about it and revert back to it. I can't tell you how many times I did. Now this has become second nature to me. So now I don't use those exact words. I find that more often than not, when I'm dealing with something that I need to put aside, I often say, okay, let's just set this aside because this is unpalatable probably to our side or something like that. But it's all the same. It's all indicating where you're going to go, but not giving an actual answer to where you're going to go. The soft no, guys, you got to master it. Tip 5. This is a critical one. Understand who you're negotiating against. In my world, there are 3 types of actors. There are negotiators who I've turned normal. There are bullies and there are chaos actors. These are 3 very different personality types. Negotiators are pretty much the people who you will encounter on a day-to-day basis, and you understand them perfectly. I offer you 5, you offer me 15. All right, guys, we're going to come to 10. Basic negotiations. I show you respect, you'll show me respect. Basic negotiation. I say no to you, you're going to say no to me. Basic negotiation. I buy you a thank you Starbucks card, you buy me a thank you Starbucks card. Basic negotiation. I don't really want to go into it. You understand who these people are. You've been taught to negotiate this way from childhood. This is the basics of fairness that your parents were teaching. And it would be really great if 100% of the world was that way. But the reason that you're here is because not everyone is not 100% that way. Otherwise, the world would be very easy. In fact, there's a good portion of the world, about 10% of the population, that are bullies. Most of my litigation colleagues, not everyone, but over 10%, I would say about 30% of the litigation bar are bullies, which does make some sense. I mean, they identify themselves as people who like to fight, and so they went into a profession that is fighting. Bullies constitute about 10% of the population, overall population. And bullies will not respect you without a fight. A bully is not defined as someone who is going to take you out back and beat you up in the schoolyard. A bully is someone who females identify as talking over them, which happens quite a bit, as I've now kind of come to learn. Doesn't give respect to your opinions, belittles you, belittles your opinions and points, laughs at points to intone that ultimately what you're saying doesn't have merit, and disregards your points. The only thing you can do with the bully is establish that you understand how to deal with bullies. And the only way to deal with the bully is to punch back. Again, not physical punching. You don't need to get into a fight. But when someone disrespects you, you need to stand your ground. And standing your ground doesn't mean punching back in the form of disrespect, because that's not who you are. After all, you're someone who doesn't lie and is going to conduct themselves truthfully. But it does mean calling out. So as an example, I actually had someone laugh at my key point, my argument. And when they did, I stopped and I said, James, wasn't called James, I see you're actually sitting there smiling at my key point. And if that's the case, and if you do not believe it has merit, then we have a problem, because I am currently at the heart of what it is I am trying to intone to you. And if you think that that is funny, and if you think that that does not have merit, as I'm seeing in your face right now, then there's really no need to continue this discussion. We can actually avail ourselves of other means. Do we want to actually have a negotiation today or not? I said this actually just last week. And I did that because generally bullies test water. Sorry, who is that actually doesn't have
business?
It's Jessica.
I already asked her to mute.
Jessica?
Can you co-host me?
Yeah, I'm going to co-host you. Thank you. Thank you, Sandy. I should have done that at the beginning. All right. Sandy will take care of that. Thank you. So you have to stand up to bullies and call them out. The reason I did that is because bullies don't immediately strike. Most bullies are actually cowards at heart. And what they do is they inch forward with bullying. And the moment you see it and recognize it, you need to call it out. That smirk would have eventually turned into eye rolls. That eye rolls would eventually turned into dismissals of points. No, just say, I know who you are. You're a bully. I'm calling you out. Done. I'm punching you back. It's the schoolyard equivalent of punching back. Even if you're weaker, the bully knows that by picking on you, they have to engage in a fight again. They don't like it. They don't like it. Bullies rarely like getting pushed back. The third actor is the most complex. And actually, you'll note that I've substituted a friendly face here in the presentation I'm giving, because that's exactly who we're dealing with down south at the present time. Chaos actors are things that people do not understand until they have great experience with them. The world is divided into chaos and order. I'm not the first person to say this. In fact, I took a course with someone who's now a bit nefarious in my youth. But basically, it was a course called Maps of Meaning. And the Maps of Meaning basically charted biblical stories and all spiritual stories across all religions and types, just endless. But they all had the exact same story, which was, and I'm speaking to a largely, Western audience, so I'll use Christian motifs, the fall from grace and the redemption. And if you want to put that into a different world, it's the fall into chaos and the resurrection into order. Human beings hate chaos. They hate disruption. They hate not having the platforms that they have built and they have identified. They hate chaos. But there's a certain percentage of actors in this world who have learned to embrace chaos, who have learned to embrace disruption. And whilst it is not a good world for them at all, they have a more stable footing there than you do. Trump is a chaos actor. He has been his whole life. Trump shakes up the board every single time, not because it leads to better outcomes for him or for anyone else. Well, not for him, but for collectively for all of us. He's shaking the board because he knows how to operate in that space. He knows how to operate in chaotic environments. He's comfortable in chaos. He's comfortable in litigation. He's comfortable in disputes. He's comfortable in being hated. These are all facets that you guys are not probably, if you're properly socially adjusted, comfortable in. And the reason chaos actors seek chaos is specifically because you are less comfortable in chaos than they are. Not that they are well placed in chaos, but you are less comfortable. Chaos actors require you to have your BATNA. Chaos actors are the reason you have your BATNA. It's because when you deal with chaos, the only thing you can do is organize your world without them. This is true in your personal relationships as much as it is anything else. I deal with people who are separating all the bloody time, despite the fact that I hate family law. It was the worst course mark I got in law school outside of Obligation du from Quebec, because I did not speak French going to McGill, which was a story in and of itself. I hate the family conflicts. It drives me nuts. There's something about it. But oftentimes, the most acrimonious divorces are people when they're not negotiating and not even bullying, because at that point, the spouses have learned to deal with bullying. They're people who are chaos actors who say, I don't care about the kids. I don't care about anything. I'm going to do this because some people aren't looking for anything logical like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned with, or negotiated with. Some people just want to see the world burn. It's funny when you have to cite Batman as a reference, but the truth is that's probably one of the most insightful lines from a movie ever because it's the most truthful. Some people just want to see the world burn. And the reason that's such an insightful line is because 80% of us have no freaking understanding of why that would be. It doesn't even enter into our heads that there are people out there who just want to see the world burn. But you're meeting one right now, and you have dealt with him for 4 years previous, and we are going to deal with him for 4 years hence. There is a reason that he is pulling out of NATO. There is a reason that he is not supporting Ukraine. There is a reason that he has turned his sight on Canada. There is a reason he has said he's not going to defend NATO alliance. It's because some people just want to see the world burn. They are more comfortable in that area, and that's all they know. And so they bring everyone into that world. Chaos actors are things you need to identify very quickly, because if you're dealing with a chaos actor, you should revert to your BATNA and just proceed on your normal way. If you're dealing with a bully, bully back. And if you're negotiating in good health. And to that end, and this is still part of tip 5, you cannot underestimate your opponent. It is possible that they're stupid. I cannot tell you how many times I heard people tell me that Trudeau was stupid. Trudeau is stupid. Trudeau is stupid. Great, but he won 3 elections. It's very possible. And by the way, people were saying the same thing about Harper. Harper is stupid. I'm a liberal, and so I'm part of the Liberal Party. I admit it because, like, I find myself really between the Liberals and the Conservatives most times, like most Canadians. My side was calling Harper stupid for 3 election cycles. And every time you call your opponent stupid, even this guy, you are doing yourself a huge disservice, because it's true they may be stupid, but they got to where they are in this world. They have some form of tactic that works. And so it's possible that they're stupid, but it's much more possible that you're just not understanding what they're doing. And that what they're trying to do is not what you are negotiating. Yes, it's stupid to sit there and say that. Sorry, guys, just 1 second, please. I apologize. Hold on. I just have a package being delivered. Apologies. It's possible that they're stupid, sure. But it's much more likely that they understand exactly what they're doing, and what they're doing has absolutely nothing to do with what they're negotiating. Trump is not trying to negotiate free trade. Trump is not trying to stop fentanyl. Trump is trying to take back the auto industry into America. Yes, he's not considering the ramifications of losing the moral high ground of the Western Alliance. Yes, he's all of this, yes. But he is doing so by being a chaos actor and saying to us, he wants something. I'm going to take the whole world into the bowels of hell with me. I'm going to disrupt the playing board, and I'm going to get what I want. And if you don't understand that you're dealing with someone who is using a tactic that is destabilizing here, you don't have the right approach. Never believe that your opponent, when acting seemingly irrationally, is acting irrationally. They know what they're doing. They have an end. It may not be the right end. It may not be a successful end, but they have an end. And identifying what that end is a critical component of actually structuring some smart negotiation. Tip 6, always ignore. Sorry, let me stop. Does anyone have any questions about actors, negotiators, bullies, chaos actors, or anything else?
Hey Mark, could you give an example maybe of somebody using that chaos tactic in a real estate transaction?
In a real estate transaction? Sure. Um, Actually, I experience it all the time. It's an actor that genuinely says, I don't care if this goes power of sale. I am not selling at this price. Okay, like, screw you. I am just going to pull the whole house of cards down. Done. And then you won't get paid any commission, realtor. Have you ever encountered that?
No, not me.
Okay, well, I guarantee you there are people who sit there and say that. There are other people who are in family disputes who say, I don't care, I'm not selling. Even though this is the same price that I just negotiated, screw you, that I just said I would accept. Even though I signed a listing agreement saying I will pay 5% commission if you bring me an offer at this. I'm not signing it. Screw you, not doing it. Chaos. Because they have ulterior motives. They're not there for negotiation. They're there to bring the house down. You experience it all the time in real estate. Make sense?
And then what is your response?
With chaos, you have to let them do what they're doing, and you have to go for a negotiated settlement. Okay, you don't want to sell this? Fine. Thank you very much. I'm going to approach your lender, engage in the power sale, and tell them I have a willing buyer. I'm just going to do an end run around you. Okay, you're not a power sale position, and you're doing this despite your wife? Fine. I'm going to set your wife up with a litigator, and the litigator is going to invoke the Partition Act and ultimately wrest this from you at your cost. I can't control your irrationality and lack of realistic. We've gone ahead and staged the house, got your offer at your price, and now you're saying no. Well, I can't deal with that. And I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise. Other people will do that. We're taking away the power from you. Batna.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Any other questions, guys, before I move on? Coolness. Always, always, always acknowledge your concessions. Never, ever say yes. Never say, you know, I said, watch your nose. Never say yes. Always say something along the lines of, I understand this is important to you. And in deference to that, I'm willing to do it. Even if the other side has not made it into a big thing. Even if they have not said, this is that important to me, say, look, I can see this is really important to you. I'm ready to give you that. Why? You're doing this because most people are rational actors. And most people, similar to what they've been taught when they were little kids, if you have the toy, then he can have the toy. If you share, then she'll share. That lesson is imbued deep within our monkey psyches. And accordingly, if you give a concession, invoke the psyche, invoke the idea that you are now expecting something back. You don't say, now you give me something, but by merely saying, look, I accept that this is important, here you go. If you then make an ask in the next minute or two, that is still resonating in the mind. And monkey brain then has to recontribute back. Concessions should always be acknowledged. And you should never be shy about referring back to your previous concessions. Look, we gave you this, we gave you this, we gave you this, and now we're ready to give you this as well. Or we're not, we can't give away the farm here. We have to pull the line at something. Always refer back. Your concessions are as good as your memory. They will forget the concessions every time. Doesn't matter what you give them, they're going to forget it. Your job is to remind them of the concessions every single time in negotiations. And you'll note that this says short shot, and that's what happens when you use ChatGPT and don't check your pictures. But what can I tell you? ChatGPT is not that good at writing yet, so there we are. Short-circuiting a process is done at your peril. Those people who are new to negotiations often don't like negotiating. And one of the tactics that they use to get over negotiations is the following. Look, I will say, let's just cut to the chase here. The price is X. I'll give you this. You're going to come back at that. We're going to end up here. So let's just agree to end up here. That is a very dangerous thing. Because if someone is good at negotiations, they're just as likely to turn to you and say, no, I'm not going to do that. And at that point, you have revealed your entire negotiation strategy in advance. Before you seek to shortcut, sometimes negotiations, the only way forward is through. You have to engage in them. Even if you've done this negotiation 17 times, you have to do the back and forth and the paperwork. Because people need to see it, and because you can never be sure who you are negotiating against until you know them. If you know them, if you're good friends, if you've done negotiations 100 times and everything else, yeah, you can call them up and say, listen, let's just do this short circuit. Let's go. Here we go. Because you're not in danger of being undercut in those instances. But if you do not know who you're negotiating with, approach shortcuts carefully. There is a reason negotiation is a protracted process. It leads to a better outcome, generally, if you do not know who you are dealing with. And the last tip I want to mention is that time is your friend. This is so difficult to internalize for people who are new, because the last thing you want is to be spending more time in negotiation. You hate it there. You're dealing against seasoned professionals who understand negotiation. God damn it, I want out of this room. I just want to claim a win. And yet, time is the essence of being good at negotiations. And time has two very different components. The first is just tactician. It's just purely tactical. Well, both of them are tactical, but one of them is tactical in the moment. The short pause is something you need to learn to master. Being quiet and listening, being quiet and just counting sheep, being quiet and doing your groceries in your head is a skill in negotiation. Again, it requires some zen. It requires a clarity of purpose while you are in negotiations to be able to say, just going to breathe, going to take a sip of my coffee, whatever it may be. Because short pauses often elicit responses. Silence is uncomfortable unless you've learned, like chaos actors learn to live in chaos, unless you've learned to embrace the silence. Silence is not a bad thing. I mean, the pause at the end of every sentence that I'm giving right now could technically be used to speed up my talk if I was nervous about what I was saying. Who knows? Maybe I am nervous about what I'm saying. But you can't tell specifically because of my pausing. Pausing is a technique, and it's a masterful one at that. You can see the scenario that we've put out. How is 85,000 for the salary? All right, 85,000 is acceptable. Now, in saying that, you're making it clear that you're not overjoyed with that, and that can still be subject to negotiations 6 months down the line. That pause did that. Of course, the pause may very well be something like, you know, I really respect that. Thank you. But I was really kind of hoping for a little bit more. Now, if you immediately say, let's run two scenarios. How's 85,000 for the salary? You know, I was hoping for a little bit more. Versus, how's 85,000 for the salary? You know, I respect that. I was hoping for a little bit more here. Is there something we can possibly do? You see the difference between those two things? One shows deference to what has been put on the table, the other is dismissive. Silence, pausing, it's a critical component. More tactically, and more importantly, the long pause. The words, we need to take this back and digest, we need time to think, is a way of saying we're at our max. I often know that what has been put on the table is acceptable, but I don't accept it in that time. I often say, you know, this is really causing us to stretch, but I respect what you've put on the table. We're going to think about this. I'll revert back to you within 24 hours. Then I call up my clients. I'm like, and then I go for coffee and I go for dinner, whatever it is. And I actually use the Gmail send function where I immediately say, great, thank you very much. And then I push the schedule send for a couple of hours later. I use the schedule send all the time. Because what I'm doing is I'm saying, you fought hard for this, buddy. Way to go. You can take that win back to your clients because everyone wants to feel that they have a win. And they only feel they have a win when you concede, when you make it look like it's a win. It's really important to understand your long pauses. It's really important as a tactician of negotiations to understand how to play that. So that's the tips that I've assembled. It's 10:50. We have 10 minutes for questions. I see that Roy has written a question. I'll just get to it. What practical outcome does the soft no achieve? If the negotiation is coming to a dead end anyways, or does the soft no potentially open up other side to compromise? Well, as I said, the soft no is a way of ensuring that negotiations continue without too much abrasiveness. If your negotiations are coming to an end, you may very well have to invoke a hard no. And sometimes, if someone is hitting the wall, just the hard no of, I'm sorry, we don't have an agreement here, is totally appropriate. But that's really far few and in between. Most times, a soft no is what you're actually looking for. I would say 90% of times, a soft no is really where you should be going over a hard no. Sometimes, tactically, a hard no is exactly what's required. Would you briefly go back to the short-circuiting slide so I can screenshot from my notes? I'll do better than that, Eva. First of all, I'll go back to the short circuit. What's the short-circuiting side? This one. Oh, the short shot. I'll do better than that. I'll post the PDF when I repost this on the video link to the website. Okay, what else? Any other questions? Just unmute yourself and go crazy, guys.
Mark, a question that I've felt many times is that many of the clients, like sometimes you're doing leases and all of a sudden the property is leased. Now, is that a way of bullying that the agents don't care that people are showing the properties and they don't inform anyone, and next you see a booking appointment, it's not showing an offer is registered. And sometimes you don't want to take action, you feel bad, but at what point we start complaining to Rico because we wasted our time and energy and these agents just don't care? I mean, we have
well, consider what your question is. Is that a form of bullying? No, because in order to be bullying a chaos actor or negotiator, you have to be in a negotiation. And in this instance, your scenario doesn't even start with negotiation. They're not negotiating with you. They've just totally disregarded you. That has nothing to do with negotiation. That has to do with professional competence. Sure, complain to Rico, but that's not a negotiation question because you were never in negotiations in the first place. They've totally disregarded you.
Thank you.
All right. Lisa, sorry, just give me 1 second. Whoever's speaking, I'll let you do it. But Lisa just asked a really interesting question. She said she's noticed there are cultural variations. How does one overcome this? There is, particularly when you're dealing with first-generation immigrants, there are cultural proclivities to negotiations that are so nuanced that it almost makes sense to engage a negotiator who understands those negotiations and those nuances. I'll give you an example. Chinese people have trouble saying no. And it's not understood by people who don't negotiate with Chinese negotiators what a no is. Now, North American Chinese people know how to say no. It's not a cultural difference. But if you go to China and you actually try to go ahead, or Japan even, and you try to negotiate something, it is seen as disrespectful to say no. And as a result, there's a whole bunch of cultural nuances to say no that we don't intone and we don't understand. Moreover, we think that we may be negotiating still when they have effectively said, well, listen, I'm letting you save face by walking away and stopping your negotiations. Understanding cultural variations is critical. Everything I have spoken about is a North American negotiating style. I am not nuanced enough to know how to negotiate with first generation or ethnic, national proclivities that exist in India, in China, and everywhere else. Others can provide much more nuanced conversations on this point, but it is very important to understand cultural dynamics and how people negotiate as a matter of course when you are doing this, for sure. Jessica, go ahead. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, this has been fantastic. I guess my question is a little nuanced, but oftentimes we're dealing with our colleagues where we can use a lot of these great negotiation tools, and then we're bringing something back to our clients and presenting it, and often that's another negotiation in a sense that becomes very emotional. And do you have any tips on how we would show them what we're going to do in our negotiations, or get them to maybe feel a little less emotional about that negotiation strategy? Sometimes it's hard for them to be patient.
Yeah, there's only one way to do this. And again, this is what it sucks to be a new negotiator. As you become seasoned, you know where things are going to end up. Properly outlining to your clients what the range of outcome is, not making it a massive range of outcome, but properly identifying what the range of outcome is and meeting that range of outcome is how you avoid that issue. Generally, the best negotiations from the perspective of a negotiator is when you've aligned your client's expectations to what is achievable, and then you achieve the achievable. Bring that back to your client as a win. That is the way to do this. But you can't. But to say that to a first-year negotiator is totally unfair, because how do they possibly know what is achievable? That's only from the benefit of experience. The reason that when I call myself a good negotiator, what I'm saying to you is I have the benefit of experience and I will set you up for that expectation such that it is defined as a win in your head. But again, there's nothing that can help you with that except experience, or pairing up with someone who is experienced and you want to sit there and watch their negotiations specifically to see how they foretell what is going to take place and prep their clients. That is the most valuable thing you can learn from someone who is seasoned. Make sense? Okay.
Yeah, so I guess you're saying basically you use your experience to prep your clients ahead of the negotiations so that it's not all something that you have to always explain.
That's 100% it is. Because you can win in negotiations, you can get the best deal, but if your clients aren't prepped for that win, then you don't even get credit for it. Your credit comes because you say, listen, at the very outset, have a hard talk with them and say, look, I know you want X, but what you're going to get is X minus 100. I can help you get there. If you want me to take this case, then you should be prepping for X minus 100, and I will get you X minus 100. You can go to other people. They'll promise you the sun, moon, stars, but I'm telling you what is achievable. I know my stuff. Here it is. And then you get X minus 50, and you get back to them and you say, look, I got you X minus 50. I fought really hard. Here you go. They've already been prepped for X minus 100. It's a win. You're done. Brian asks, it's always intimidating getting a Brian Madigan question because you talk about being steeped in experience. What do you think about the difference between real life negotiations and those that are over email? Email has less nuance. I don't know, guys. Maybe it's because I'm 50 and so I like the phone. But when I am engaged in negotiations, outside of like just this is a price point negotiation, no problem. Like, sure, okay, email back and forth because we're negotiating with negotiators, and as I said, it's easy, it's playground large. But if you're asking contentious negotiations over a variety of points, I always prefer in-person negotiations to email. Email is for documenting and for making sure that you have records of concessions, but not for the actual nuance of negotiation. Matthew asks, how do you manage client expectations when you know you're dealing with a chaos actor on the other side of the table? Do you shelter them from it, or do you allow more full transparency on what's coming? When you are dealing with what you perceive to be a chaos actor, you acknowledge that that's the type of person you're dealing with immediately to your clients. And you express to them that you need to have your BATNA and they need to be prepared to walk away, because the win in that case is walking away at that point. You have to define it for them. You have to explain to them that who you're dealing with, that you know who they're dealing with it. You will hold their hand as you kind of go forward. And you have to also immediately start preparing them for their BATNA. If that involves litigation, you should be getting a litigator now, speaking to a litigator now, because that way when negotiations fail, there's already a transition plan and they're already well within their thought process as to what it is they need to do. BATNAs are critical and to be shared to others, for sure, Matthew. All right, what else? Come on, you have 2 more minutes. This is the last question. Whoever does this question, you have to do it with a drum roll because you're the last one up. Okay, so Eva asks, what's an example of a BATNA in real estate? Well, if you're selling and you don't get a price, maintaining the house. That's a BATNA. Done, finished. And Courtney, for good measure, Courtney, how does a newer or perceived newer negotiator approach a seasoned negotiator? Very carefully and nicely. Remember, the vast majority of people you're going to be engaging with are going to be friendly negotiators. Acknowledging that you're new often engenders sympathy and friendliness. It's not a harm. Everyone can tell you're new. It's not as if you can it's not as if you're going to be developing crow's feet under your eyes for the negotiations. Believe me when I say, when I look at someone, I can tell that they don't have the years of experience that I have. I used to be thin. This is not something you can hide, so acknowledge it. Acknowledge it with kindness. Hope that you're not dealing with chaos actors or bullies. And if you are, bring in a more seasoned negotiator who can identify chaos actors and bullies and help you through it. Because that's really where seasoned negotiation helps and guides you. Okay, so guys, we are at the end of our session. I will post this. Thank you very much to everyone who attended. I know this is a bit far afield from our normal legal negotiations, but from our normal legal studies, but negotiations are what we do and they're what lawyers do. So I was all too glad for the opportunity to be able to speak to you here today. I'll post this on the website. Thank you all. We'll post our next course shortly, which will, by the way, also not be on a legal subject. We're going to deal with pro formas and building out financial pro formas and math, which again is a skill set you need separate and apart from law. So why not deal with it? All right, guys, my best. Take care.